you really want.
Dude, one time I tried to like carve left-handed.
Oh man.
What's your phone number? I call you. I can be the one you get your all to. No, I hate to fall, someone falls through. Maybe fall through. You different. Fuck what they all do. Trying to get to know you on a level you ain't been introduced to.
We are Denver. This is the DoodleCast with Nicholas Grimes.
Hey. Welcome. That's the Fade Out. And I'm Nick G. And I have with me Frank Kiyakowski of Kiyakowski Press, a really good Denver artist, local legend. And you are here with us today on the DoodleCast. And today we're talking about replication, which I think we'll find has many meanings. But we'll just start with like a little intro. If you watch this, you probably already know who I am, so I'll let Frank just kind of tell you about himself, kind of what he does.
I'm a relief printmaker, and I use the traffic cone for a template. And so this is a traffic cone itself, and this is a template that isn't finished yet, so I'm still kind of working on the backdrop. But once you carve it out, you can ink the plate and then make multiple prints with it. And as far as I know, like these cones last for a very long time. Like I've had cones from 15 years back, 16 years back that are still getting crisp prints. So with that you can do an unlimited amount of prints off a template like this.
Yeah. No, it's definitely cool. It's something that speaking of replication, I've tried to pull a cone cut before. And one of the things that isn't like super instinctive about it is you do have to like test the carve a little more, you know?
Yeah.
But it is pretty cool for sure. And it's pretty interesting how many different types of traffic cones there are.
Yeah, there's some out there that are real gnarly. You don't even bother with them anymore.
Yeah.
You'll kind of look in the interior and feel them sometimes and curve out on the cone. And so with that, there's a lot of cones out there on the streets that you could technically use, but they're very difficult to cut. And the other feature the cone's got is you want to be carving usually at room temperature. If you're carving like out in 30 to 40 degree temps, it's pretty difficult. The cone will stiffen up.
Yeah.
And your hands get kind of cold and arthritic. So with that, summertime is probably the best time for carving out in nature.
Yeah, most definitely, man.
And then a lot of the cones out there are very thick, kind of plastic. This one here is pretty soft, so it's pretty easy when you carve it.
Yeah, there's like those new green ones. I don't know if you're cutting those. They're like too soft, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I kind of go gaga like on different colored cones, so the orange one, is pretty standard, but every now and then you'll see the green or some really weird variations of it.
Yeah.
Orange has always been the most frequent out there.
Most definitely, man. So just kind of getting into the theme. I know it's just us this week. I actually might start doing this whenever we go on a break week, because I think it makes sense. But so my first kind of question with the theme of replication is, I guess to me, replication is copying something, in one way or another. So I guess the first question I have to ask is, like, other than like the physical manifestation of printmaking, which is essentially copying, copying your own work, what is it out there that you tend to copy?
Well, there's definitely photo references for a lot of the work. This one here for sure. And from there, a lot of the time doing the backdrop. Sometimes that means buildings or trees or animals or other types of items that initially weren't in the first draft. So I tend to draw characters first based off of photography. This one's an example of something that I drew probably a year or two ago. It's kind of hard to remember. And then I kind of carved the people out. And in the end, I was struggling with the bench itself or what they're sitting on. And then just in the background, what might be there, maybe some dialogue, to the effect of what's going on in this scene. And so with that, I tend to kind of work with characters, turn myself into a cartoon character, and my muses, who usually reject me outright, like initially you're like, oh yeah, this is gonna be a great collaboration, and you have a certain not only spiritual attraction or intellectual attraction, but a lot of the time it's physical. And then you get your ass handed to you. It's like, well, no, Frank, I'm not interested in you that way. So this is that kind of cut and everything. And actually, one of my friends that I've collaborated with on clothing. So there's another item that you can replicate. Yeah. And it has function, and people can wear it, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, it's because I was actually talking with a couple people this morning on the way over here, and I guess our conversation kind of started from like the topic of appropriative imagery, or really appropriation's where I started from. But I mean, I personally use a lot of appropriated imagery, and I think, really, if we're being honest, we all do. Yeah. We're all from the same culture, whether we realize it or not, But, yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought, because I definitely steal a lot of numeric designs, and I honestly used to. I haven't been doing it very much recently, because I had qualms with it. I was like, like, I do get that I can use, like, certain cultural iconographies and be respectful about it, but at the same time, it's like I do have to recognize that, like, I have to give those icons their own space, Yeah. Which is a weird thing to think about.
Yeah, and then, personalities and people become things that get replicated. Obviously, with presidential stuff and all that, those guys all get swiped up, and actually that is a big seller. People buy that kind of stuff. One artist friend of mine kind of felt a bit of shame in using Trump and Hillary Clinton, and I was like, well, if people like it, if they want to, and whereas I tend to not like tune into kind of the big, political kind of people, or give them my energy anyway. Once that vote thing comes down, those guys are always going to be in the limelight and rightfully abused and made fun of, and they're in the public domain at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I always like the stuff that's a little less noticed, It's like, man, why do you gotta talk about the obvious? Like, yeah. Yeah. It's like, wow, we literally spend millions of dollars giving these people exposure. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing.
Even with, like, Comic-Con is going on this weekend, so if you go downtown, you're gonna see Princess Leia and a lot of scantily clad, women and men too, and oh yeah. And so with that, though, those are, other types of things that are swiped up by the mainstream and kind of under like licensed type of terrain. So it's kind of sketch at that point, as to who owns it and all that.
Yeah, like what are you copying if it's your own version of what you're copying,
And even photography is that way, if you're in the public domain and somebody photographs you, at that point, you're gone, Yeah. they'll do whatever they want. You kind of know that ahead of time, so we all can be the subject of artistic renderings by other people, certainly in photography, film, and all that.
Yeah.
And certainly for me, I objectify a lot of my subjects, and it's not always a good position for them to be in. Some of them are like, well, I don't want to be objectified and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But for me, I tend to draw people that I kind of have some story or backdrop with, that I've known and created stuff with. So they kind of become replicas of not reality, but of my desires and so forth.
Kind of how you perceive them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's kind of cool because it carries through the medium, you know?
Yeah.
Definitely interesting. But, yeah, I guess that kind of moves into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is really, like, when you're reproducing something, what exactly are, like, the qualities you're looking for in the reproduction? Like, are you looking for, like, a pure copy, or are you looking for something a little different?
There's always going to be mistakes in the way it cut things. I'm looking at this piece here, and there's so much terrain on it. Wait, what was the question again?
Oh, it's basically like, are you going for consistency, or are you looking for something else? Which is, like, I know, very open-ended question.
Yeah. I love crisp prints. Like, this template is real smooth. So I like the texture itself, which is usually going to be, it'll make for a pretty crisp print in the end. The consistency of, say, like, these are cut into rectangles, the surface you're drawing on. And so I don't have a history of necessarily making things square.
Yeah, not linear.
Yeah, so they're always sort of, they're still geometrical shapes, but they're not, they're real sloppy. I mean, it's literally the way I cut them on the streets. And then you could crop it down, and I have at times, but there's not really consistency in the shape of the cone because of that. Like, I'm not out there with, like, a ruler and measuring it. Although in the aftermath you could do that, but it's always sort of like a almost like going in a V shape, you know, toward the top of the cone. So the cone itself, it has this very consistent type of material, but what it doesn't have is necessarily always the same dimensions for each cut.
Yeah.
But overall, they're really stable materials to press prints with. You know, they, to me, they're better than linoleum. Because they hold up better. Linoleum will kind of deteriorate.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of consistency just in how you press your prints, how you ink a plate. And so with that, there's a lot of error, misprints, and so forth.
Well, it's really funny because people that don't really do relief print don't realize how much practice it takes, you know, to pull a clean print. Like, it's, you know, like, it's not like you just get it on your first try usually. Yeah,
and you got to expect, like, you know, misprints along the way. Yeah. And so with that, especially if you're doing, like, additions, which I don't do, but usually if you do a run of 100, maybe 20 of them might come out, you know, perfect prints, the master print.
Yeah. That's definitely, because when I got into printmaking, I was like, oh, I can just do this. Like, I watch people do it. I can figure it out, you know?
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I, like, spent, like, hours in the studio doing it until I actually did, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of why I've always been sort of drawn to it. it's definitely something that you need a lot of practice with to do.
Yeah, and it also makes it easy to give up a print, you know. The cost of them is lower, but also you aren't as attached because you still have the template, and usually you'll keep copies for your own. So with that, you know, you could have 100 out there, and if they're selling like hotcakes, which they don't tend to do that, but
yeah.
You know, every now and then, one time I went to South by with actually Wheelchair Sports Camp, and so Kaylin was doing a sit-in at old Corey Gardner's office. They're trying to repeal the ACA. That's just a little politics, but we were down at South by during, or Austin during South by rather, and the street vending for that night was just phenomenal, you know, where you had a young crowd and, you know, they were out having a good time, and I was doing pretty awesome on that occasion and everything because of the foot traffic and the festivities and everything.
Yeah, it's always like interesting seeing how things line up. Kind of like getting back to the subject too, because it relates. Is it's like you can just notice patterns with like what people do, you know, and like kind of learning how to read them. I don't think manipulating is really a good word for it, because it's really about like where you put yourself with it. But like, I don't know. I think a lot of times one of the things that artists have a hard time doing, just because it's hard to get a community around you with art, because it's such a personal thing, is really just like finding that that little click, or not like a social click, but like your little wheelhouse, kind of like the ebb and flow of how your work goes.
And people to work with. Replication just lends itself to collaboration. And that's what I enjoy probably the most, working on clothing. And sometimes the commissions are kind of hard if you ever get them. I don't do them too often, but clothing, I love doing clothing. You know, at that point it's on somebody's shirt or pants and stuff like that. And then also photography and film, working with other people on little projects, guerrilla projects usually.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the subjects I kind of wanted to talk about was how, like, are you copying something, or are you just making it accessible to somebody else through your lens, you know? And I think that's a pretty interesting point on that, because it is like, it's way easier to explain your art on a shirt than it is to be like, you know, this is a print, like. Yeah.
And I think what I like too with replicas or anything is that, you know, whatever my version is doesn't matter. The person that is the spectator has, you know, his or her own view of what it means and all this. So in this particular piece, who knows, you know, I had the idea of make him one of us. And it's sort of that thing of turning somebody into a, you know, a freak or a lab rat in this case, but it's literally like the diabetic. But somebody else might look at this and be like, oh man, she's gonna stick him right in the eye with a syringe. You know, so it's got this real sadistic kind of look about it and everything, and not necessarily something that somebody would look at and say, oh, I want this, you know, I want to have this and everything. It's more of a story, kind of a print, and it's something that, you know, I drew up recently. And at the time, the film footage that I used to, you know, as we said, like replicate it, she was actually putting a black eye on him with, you know, eye makeup, and so it was a kind of a pin type of a device. And so at the time, of course, I'm going to turn it into a syringe, but it had a very weird surrender kind of quality about it, you know, where he's allowing her to work on his eye. and everything, which, you know, that's kind of a pleasure. I mean, we all dream about stuff like that.
Make me beautiful.
Yeah. Just get pampered, you know. But
yeah, it's definitely. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. The way that I don't know, people operate, and that's a funny point to make. You know, is like when somebody knows how to do something better than us, and we let them do it for us. It's like we are submitting to them.
Yeah.
You know? But it's a good thing. Don't worry about it. Like, it's no bad on you. But yeah, it's, humans are funny like that, you know? So, we do have another weird question. One of the weird open-ended questions.
yeah.
So, like, we were kind of just talking about it. The syringe comes up, and I mean, a lot of rappers will use like the same words, and you'll like notice it if you listen to them. I think it's the same with most artists. But I mean, other than like caricatures and syringes, like, what's some imagery that you've seen, not even necessarily in your own work, that you find like really interesting as well?
I'm kind of drawn to renderings of humans, and usually in some sort of a narrative. And a lot of the time I don't understand the narrative because I'll see it on the street.
Yeah.
And I love language, actually. Like, I like to see sticker art. You know, you're just in the restroom pissing and somebody just stuck a sticker on the stall, and a lot of the time it might be a music band, or you just have no clue exactly what it is. But it's, if the language is kind of like nifty or just weird, it'll kind of make me want to investigate it. Yeah. Or just I'll look at it and I'll be like, oh, that kind of put a thought in my brain that wasn't there. And so with that, I don't view a lot of art, actually. I mean, I kind of do via social media, but I don't often get into, say, like museums or galleries.
Yeah.
And when I do, it is sort of, you know, I take my time and all that. But that world's a lot different. It's not as comfortable of a world for me personally. But out on the streets, yeah, you see a lot of just sticker and you'll see tags, of course, but a lot of those are real cryptic. You have no idea, and it might just be nonsense. You just don't really know. And so with that, I am pretty literal, though, about what I draw, and so I tend to kind of be drawn toward more literal types of things visually, for sure.
Yeah.
So.
No, I definitely, I really like iconography, and I definitely agree, like, numerics and alphabets are really cool. Like, I don't know, because I used to do a lot of caricatures, and I would always, like, write little taglines on them, you know, like, you draw somebody's face, and then you write something like, this guy needs to take a dump or something, you know, like...
He looks, like, kind of constipated or
Yeah, you
something.
get mad at yourself for your own drawing, and then you're like, this is why this guy's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell it to you as this guy is a character.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely interesting because language is one of, like, the first, you know, repeatable things that I think we all use on a day-to-day, and it is literally repeatable. Like, toddlers will repeat the words you use. Every way you use them, even, you know, down to, like, accents. And I guess that's kind of something that I think is kind of interesting, is, like, the way we accentuate things as individuals isn't necessarily that individual, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's always been kind of interesting to me. And I think language really hits at that point very hard, whether people, like, recognize it or not.
Yeah.
Because that is what it is. And I think art is the same way.
Mm-hmm. And I'll pay attention to like hairstyles or features, but that has more to do with actually looking at people. I love to people watch, and so with that, the iconography of just how people look. A fellow came out yesterday for a vape pen break or whatever, and he made the mistake of, like, I can't remember what he said to me. I think it had to do with the neared, as people have said, well, you have a neared. And I'm like, what's a neared? And they're like, a neck beard. And so with that, I get a lot of, like, commentary on that. And with that, though, I'm going to kind of steer him toward the sale of a print, you know, because I'm going to see if I can do it. And I really hardlined him. I'm like, well, come on. What are you up to today? Oh, I was at Comic-Con. I was like, well, how much money did you blow at Comic-Con? And he's just like looking at the women like a complete pervert. Like, there's all these great looking women outside of this spot, and I'm waiting for a ride, and, you know, I'm just not really amused by the eye candy aspect. I mean, I can appreciate it, but anyhow, I had to like steer him toward eventually buying a print, and I almost blew it. Like, I told him, well, I showed him the exterior of the cab, and, you know, it's got the replicas and prints on it. And I kind of cornered him into getting this one that looks like a Medusa, but then I was actually showing him the merch and making sure he's going to like going up about $10 if he if he buys something. But at the end, I was like telling him, well, you know, this, you can put a curse, these are cursed, and you can give it to your enemy. And he had already handed me the $10 bill, and another pedicab was sitting there just sort of listening to this, a guy I know. And at one point, he wasn't going to buy it. So I blew the sale. It was so devastating. And then I finally cornered him, and he's like, well, you can keep the $10 bills in the print. I'm like, well, then I'm ripping you off, right? So in the end, he did, you know, take the print, and I was like, well, you know, I was just joking about that voodoo curse and all that. So, but he did get the print. I would have felt like an asshole, I guess, if I hadn't given him something. But well-meaning guy, but he kind of engaged me due to, you know, the way I looked, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's like kind of interesting too, is this whole idea of a stereotype, you know, like the expectations we have of things. And honestly, stereotype is originally a printmaking term.
Yeah. Huh.
It's how we used to copy images back before larger scale printing on rollers. Big, giant rolling machines. When it was all like a much smaller
So it kind of
scale.
comes from a printmaking replica term? Or?
Yeah, because the stereotype was like really like how journalists used to replicate images, and it was like very basic black and white, like block printing. You know? And I mean, that's where we get the term stereotype from, is because a lot of it was used in a time when, honestly, pretty similar to this time, when there was a lot of racial tensions. So that's why it's now used as like a cultural lingo for, you know, putting somebody in a specific group based off of a prejudgment or prejudice. And it's weird because we all have like our own prejudices, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I would agree with you. I don't know if I'm going to be best friends with the guy taking the vape pen break, you know what I'm saying? But that's on me, you know? But it is kind of interesting to think about, because it's also, people have stereotypes about you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of something that kind of gets back to the topic, which is like how you change yourself. I even think is a form of replication, because it's like only you kind of know how this operates, this weird thing that is you. And so like you're stuck in the pattern because your patterns are yours and it's your life to live, but also you can recognize them and change them, you know?
Yeah, and I think we all kind of get caught in our routines, and when you get feedback from certain people. They're like, well, that wasn't a good way to communicate with me. And even I'll sometimes kind of adjust my behaviors, hopefully for the better. But at other times, I try to steer people toward my own agenda. So, with that, you don't want to like dominate other people either. You want it to be, kind of a symbiotic kind of exchange, hopefully. Where it's not parasitic or, abusive.
Yeah, because, honestly, one of the things, and this is one of these stereotypes that I hold in my head that I might need to let go of. We'll find out one day. But in a lot of, like, the work I do, and I always, like, try to work with, like, collectives and, like, groups of people, because I'm drawn to that. Like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But, you run into, like, people that are sometimes, like, very sycophantic,
What's that mean?
Like, they kind of, like, play games with people.
Yeah.
And they, it's weird because it's like, I've been in situations where it's like, oh, we're all, like, working for the same thing. And, like, nobody's trying to, like, mess with anybody. But a lot of times you run into people that kind of, like, collide with that.
Yeah.
Kind of take over the ship. And it's weird. Because I have, like, this weird theory that, like, everybody's either an enabler or a narcissist, which I guess I should explain that a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that, I guess I should say, everybody that thinks is either an enabler or a narcissist, because I guess there's people that, like, don't really fall into those categories, but I don't think I'd be having conversations with them. But it's like, they're, like, very nice people that are smart, and they know when something's wrong, but they don't necessarily do something to change it because they're very nice people, and it's like they feel like it's not their place, it's not their right to decide that. And then there's like the people that recognize whatever's going on, and they're also smart people, but they do something about it regardless, and they just don't care because, it's like, oh, they're the center of their own universe,
Yeah.
And I think that, like, most people, and again, this is like a weird stereotype, kind of fall into that. But it's kind of like how you use that energy,
Yeah. I've been accused of being both, I guess, by different people. But when I think of enabler, I always think of, drug use.
Yeah.
And so with that, we all have had alcoholic friends or, people addicted to coke or heroin. And with that, I don't really try to change them, I guess, I'm not going to go down with it either. I'll have a drink or two every now and then with certain people, but...
Yeah.
I'm not going to be that guy that's going to be like, oh, your life is so fucked up and, all this, because it's just... It would feel like I'm out of my boundary. Yeah. But at the same time, I do sort of... tag along with that game, I guess, so to speak, because it interests me, visually sometimes. A lot of replica and iconography can go through booze, marijuana, the vape pen. I can't even remember when those started to hit the mainstream, but once they did, you just see people out on the street and they look real chic and, ooh, the vape pen. And then they probably invented places where they could smoke together and all that. So with that, that's sort of a culture that, it needs, like, support. We need our support group. And we need to have 420. And where can we publicly smoke and all that. And so I like to kind of play with the syringe issue because... a lot of the time, if you were to see somebody injecting junk out on the streets, you'd be like, shame on you. Not here, not on my corner. And so with marijuana, it's kind of a little more mainstream and socially acceptable. But just because we're in Colorado, a lot of the people who visit here are very where do I go? And, am I going to get ticketed? They have a legit kind of concern. And so I enable them. I'm like, well, there's this dispensary, my friend, he sells pot. I'll try to send them to the small guys if I can, or I just don't get involved.
I always give those people legal advice, and they look at me like, what did he just say?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, here's your ounce limit. You really should have looked this up before you came here, but whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is always kind of funny. So yeah, this idea of replication, I guess, because we were like talking about that, like the idea of like the enabler and the narcissist,
Yeah.
Really just archetypes. We could just call them what they are. They're my weird little made-up ones. But it's really that I also think that those are things that people replicate. Like those are, in a weird way, that's like a social system that's been left to us. It's just not spoken, it's acted out. And I think that the really weird thing about replication is you have like a uniqueness to the mass effect. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's something to the quantifiable that makes it almost more meaningful or easier to understand in a weird way. I don't know if you get exactly what I'm saying, but it's like, it's very hard to explain for me.
Yeah, it's kind of abstract. I don't quite get it.
Yeah, it's like, it's really just that, like, there's always something unique. The more numbers you throw at something, you're always going to find something new in it, Like, it's very experiential.
And you're talking, like, for replication and...
Yeah, okay. The more times that you try something, the more you're going to figure out about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the exact number of mastering something, they have actually like put something to it that if you've done something so many times you've quote unquote mastered it.
I don't know if I believe those though. Yeah.
I don't know that I do either, but there is a certain, like when I'm carving, for instance, right now, I definitely can't teach that.
No.
And so if somebody's like, well, how do I do this? And it's something you almost have to, like, labor through. And even specifically, how I hold my carving tool versus somebody else. I'm right-handed, so if you got a lefty, the guy's going to be pushing left to right versus, and it's opposite. Usually if you're right-handed, you're pulling left to right.
Yeah.
Versus when you're carving, you're actually tending to go right to left if you're a right-hander the way I am. But yeah, somebody were like, well, how do I do this? Or how, I can kind of give them a few verbal cues, don't cut yourself. That just kind of common sense, kind of safety stuff. But at the same time, you get cut. It's good. I mean, we were talking last week that you gouged yourself by accident one time, and that's just kind of part of it.
Yeah, I mean, learning how to use a cutter, unless you're using like the pole ones, but honestly, if you're doing work like this, you can't really use those. You know? Like, because it's a lot harder to get those like fine details.
Mm-hmm. I love lines for replication, like this arm here, it's likely going to be kind of a line arm, so it's got a lot of line texture.
Yeah, that's honestly one of the things that I think is really cool about your prints, is you do take like very realistic caricatures, like for sure, and you put these funky textures in them,
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of the joy of relief printing, is that you can do weird things with texture.
And it really does go back to drawing to cross-hatching. You can do a lot of the same thing. You're doing a lot of line work there and everything, and so that would translate like right over to print making. A few times I've collaborated with people where the person will draw the template and then I carve and vice versa. And not too often because, you have to coordinate those things with somebody and but with that, you can replicate, other people's work too.
Well, and with printmaking too, especially if you're doing your own like design work to pull print with, like you're gonna have to print stylistically to match what you drew, Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily everybody can print everybody else's work.
Yeah.
Well,
I think historically there's always been the master printer, and a lot of the time that person's function wasn't to be the creative side of it. They're literally a technician, that's going to like render a print. And so with that, printmaking and in general has had a history of having somebody having a print shop, and then they're pulling the master print. I have a few friends, that work in lithography, which I don't do. But
I mean, it would transfer well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I honestly think that is a good way to do print work, because you really nobody can tell you how to pull a consistent good print. That's for you to figure out, but you can learn little tricks from other people's little tricks.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I personally like it a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't have to have an actual press. It's such a labor-intensive thing. My press is real ghetto. It's a roll of paper, and I lay the ink on the plate on a table surface about like this. But in the end, I'll drop it to the floor, and I got to get on my hands and knees. And the roll of paper, I just pretty much drop over after I put the paper over it. And at that point, you're physical labor. It's just pretty much, so it might take you like 5 minutes to actually render the ink onto the paper. And you have to pull it up and peek under there every now and then. You'll see little blotches, or, you might have a hair caught in there or something like that. So it'll affect the print. I mean, I haven't had a pet like in years. I think one time I was reading people like Jeffrey Dahmer never had pets or something like that. The serial killers, but anyhow, at the time, or recently rather, I've been thinking about getting a cat. I'm kind of more of a cat person, but I think what prevents me from doing it is actually the cat hairs would be all over the place, and then the maintenance of the cat itself, and then if I travel, you gotta have somebody cat sit.
Yeah. So I always think it's funny, cats are really low maintenance until you leave
litter
them
box.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's funny because it's like, yeah. Same with dog, though. You definitely need somebody to watch your dog if you're leaving it.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike a cat, a dog will get codependency issues. It'll be like, oh no.
Yeah.
Where's my person?
Well, I like cats more, but I have a slight allergy to them. So actually, somebody was telling me it's their saliva. They lick their fur, and then you get the dander from the cat, and then if you get it on your eyes, they'll be itching and all that. It's a minor one, though.
Yeah. I'm kind of the same way. I mean, I like cats. I am more of a dog person, to be honest, but I'm cool with cats. I like all the critters, but I'm a little allergic to them for sure.
They're fun to draw.
Yeah.
Any types of animals. And I don't do it as often as maybe I should. Yesterday I got lucky and I picked up a ride from Comic-Con, and it was, I assume, a married couple, middle-aged, and which I'm middle-aged too. But anyhow, I got them there, and along the way, the woman was saying, "Oh, I love your outfit," and something about that, and then we got into the subject of art and all that. But the prints she did select were the Dog Shit Chronicles. It's like this one that I did way back, and I would photograph like people from a second story window, usually women, with a bag in their hand, and they have the dog on the leash, and you're just watching, and then boom, the dog takes a shit, and and then you know, the etiquette of the neighborhood, I guess, calls for them to, and this was in Capitol Hill, but
Yeah.
anyhow, you'd watch her bend over and, you know, use that baggie and boom, pick up that shit. So one time I, like, photographed somebody in the deed and later drew it. And I think I did 3 of them called the Dog Shit Chronicles. And it pretty much was about people who pick up dog poop with plastic bags. And
Yeah.
they look kind of self-conscious, you know, when it's
Kind of like a
happening.
dog pooping.
It's one of those things where they don't realize they're being watched.
Yeah. No, I always love like those candid moments.
But I'm glad she, you know, she selected that one. But yeah, she selected animal ones, and then the crows, she selected that one too. So.
All right, guys. Just while we have a little downtime kind of in the middle here,
Yeah.
I just got a couple of plugs. And honestly, if you got anything coming up,
I would like to do a plug.
yeah, I'm just going to read these off real quick. Again, there's a Third G-Comp Volume 1 release, which is on July 14th, 7 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. at the Europa Coffee House. It's like a combination of art and music, so calling it an album release would be incorrect to me. And then one of the other things I wanted to tell you is there is a show coming up on the 8th, so, and it's downtown, so if you want to come visit us at Meet in the Street, we are Denver. We will be on Champa. We will be there pretty much all day. I'll be running sound, and I'll probably have a little spot for people to come doodle. So if I got downtime, you can doodle with me. But at the Clock Tower Cabaret, also on the 8th of this month, will be Dystopia, which is a cabaret show. And it'll be from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. And then, of course, I've been plugging this for weeks because I love these guys over at Cabal Gallery. They have their show coming up, Autonomous. It's call for entry. You have a few days to submit. Digital submissions to submit online by the 6th. And then the show will be on the 15th. I highly recommend you check it out over at Cabal Gallery. And yeah, man, those are my plugs for today.
Yeah,
what do you got coming up?
Well, let me do a quick plug. Like, I should have done this last week, but
It's cool.
we have Denver Artists for Rent Control. We're doing a letter writing campaign, and so please, you know, if you have the chance, go to the website. And we're asking people. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself an artist. It's just for general idea of rent control. But for people to write letters to Hickenlooper or Hancock on the subject of, you know, rent control in Denver. It should have been done probably 20 to 30 years back, but the safeguards were never there. And so with that, we're doing a letter writing campaign through, I believe, August 15th. You can drop your letters off at Mutiny Information Cafe, the Mercury Cafe, and there's a Boulder site. But go to the website. I'm Denver based, but in any event, you know, please, you know, take the time to maybe write a letter and drop it off. And there's also a PO that you can send it to via the post office. And we'd love to have handwritten letters. That's not always realistic, but
Yeah, it's a lot cooler though.
yeah, it's a personal touch. You know, you can express to the mayor, governor, just how badly a lot of the communities are being affected by high rents.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just artists. Like, this is an issue that affects everybody.
Yeah.
You know? And especially people that do not necessarily have as much quote-unquote stability, you know? And honestly, this is something I've been thinking about is I've been trying to figure out how I can replicate those old art spaces. Like, you remember what I'm talking about? Like,
The
all
warehouses.
those weird warehouses that used to exist. And
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but certainly when I was young, you always just dreamed of this creative space. I don't know if you call it a tree house or what, but some spot where, you know, you could kind of do your creative stuff and not get busted by the, well, usually as an authority figure of some sort, whether that's parents or just the person that's, you know, being real critical of what you're doing and that type of thing. So warehouse spaces, you know, have always had enormous potential, you know.
So much freedom.
Yeah.
It's something that I definitely miss that used to just be rampant everywhere, you know? And that's honestly, it's like very related. There's a reason why there's a lot of art groups looking for rent control. They've moved several times, and, you know, but yeah, it is something that does relate to all of us, and it's one way that we can, you know, reclaim our city a little bit.
Yeah.
And I mean, all of this stuff is work in progress, you know. It all takes time.
It's a fight. I mean, and, you know, it's been going on way before I was born, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I don't think, for the most part, I don't think art and music is necessarily too socially accepted. I mean, it kind of is, but, you know, they're not. If you work in a grocery store bagging groceries, you know, you're going to get paid, you know that. And versus if you're doing music or art, you're not going to get paid.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to pay the rent a lot of the time on that art. And so with that, you know, if you're going to spend a lot of time doing art, you got to expect not to have value applied to it at times.
Yeah. Most definitely, man. Well, we're getting pretty close to time here. Probably got a couple more minutes, so we can keep drawing and carving.
And I need to clean up this mess.
Oh, man, no worries.
So the one thing about carving is it's a lot of mess. I mean, you're probably looking at maybe 1,000 strokes or so during, I don't think that many, but at least 100 during, you know, the last half hour to 45 minutes.
Yeah, I used to try to do that on the bus. And then I was like, wow.
And you probably got
I'm
cut.
a jerk. Yeah.
Would you draw too?
Yeah.
You know, yeah. It's tough. I mean, you're on a moving surface, and so, you know, it's not stable.
Yeah. And yeah, just our little final shout outs before we kind of wrap everything up. So yeah, definitely check out Denver Artists for Rent Control, guys. It's important. Not even if you're not an artist or consider yourself one. Even if you are an artist, don't consider yourself one. Stop that. Lol. And then just a shout out to Ghost House Denver, Rich and Miles in there running the boards. And we are part of WeAreDenver, which I think most of us are. And we got Meet in the Street coming up on the 8th, so next weekend. And actually this show, along with several other WeAreDenver podcasts, are probably taking a week break just because we're dipping our feet into a different production schedule. So we probably need to take a little week break, a little breather. But we'll be back after that. And it also gives me time to fill up our roster. So we should have some pretty cool artists coming in soon. And yeah, again, this is Ghost House for its lovely facilities. I always love coming down here. And yeah, this has been the DoodleCast. We're kicking it and doodling. And you guys have a groovy afternoon.